Hi, my name is Michael Mustard, and today I'm going to talk with you about how to do math homework. I've been a tutor for 25 years, and I've tutored many students, some very good at math, some struggling with math. But I found a constant problem that many of them have, whether they're good or struggling, is that they don't really know how to do math homework properly. This can cause difficulties because, like anything else, math homework has a purpose. You do homework expecting it to produce results, and if it's not producing results for you, then there's a question: what am I doing wrong? Why isn't this working for me? So today I'd just like to go over a few things that I think might help you to get more out of the homework you're doing, or to encourage you maybe to do some homework that you're not doing. For those of you who are new to this channel, I answer questions and topics in math and science. If you do have any questions, feel free to put them in the comments below. Now, before I get into how to do math homework, I just want to start off with maybe a couple of disclaimers. First of all, this talk is aimed at people in high school and at the beginning of university. I also want to point out that this is not a step-by-step guide. The way that I teach in general, I understand that everyone's an individual. I hope that some of the things I have to say will be useful to you, but I encourage you to try some of the things I say, keep those ones that you find useful, and reject the ones that you don't. To start with, I'd like to begin by talking about the purpose of math homework. If you don't know why you're doing something, sometimes it's difficult to do it, and certainly difficult to do it well. With math homework, I want to help you to understand why you should do it, and also when it's a good idea not to do it. Okay? First of all, it's important to understand that math homework is not something you do to get marks. It's something you do to learn. Math homework is not for another person. It's for you. If it's not benefiting you, why are you doing it? The next thing that's important to understand about math homework is that it's not something you need to do perfectly the first time. In fact, quite the opposite. Math homework is a place where you can make mistakes and it costs you nothing. This is why it's such a valuable learning opportunity for you. A third important thing to understand is that the purpose of math homework is not to demonstrate to a teacher or a parent or anyone else that you know what you're doing. It's actually almost the opposite. It's a place where you get to uncover your own ignorance. When I see students doing math homework, very often they're trying to get the questions right, but that's almost the opposite of the purpose. The purpose is to try to get as many questions as possible wrong so that you can understand what you don't know and what it is you still need to learn. The final point I want to make about the purpose of math homework is that it's something that you should never be doing mindlessly. If you find the homework you're doing is mindless, stop doing it. Math homework is worthless. It's a waste of your time if you're not doing it with your full intellect engaged. Now, you may have some other ideas about the purpose of math homework, and I would love to hear them. So please feel free, if you think I've missed anything, to pop your idea into the comments below, and maybe we can discuss it a little bit. Now, many of the things that I'm talking about and will be talking about in this video are based on my own experience as a student learning and as a teacher teaching mathematics. And one thing when I was a student is that I had a couple of assumptions that I was operating under. I'm not going to suggest these are the most healthy assumptions, but in some ways they helped me to do well in math. The first assumption I had was that, to me, any mark on a test less than 100% was a fail. I'm not suggesting you should think this way, but in math, really, if you understand something, it's really difficult to do it wrong. So my goal in doing homework was to try and reach a place where I was confident that if I took a test, I would be able to get every question correct because I fully understood the topic. In order to be confident that I would get 100% on a test, what I had to do was seek out questions that were difficult in order to prove to myself that I could solve them. So, in a sense, when I was doing homework, my goal was not to get the questions right. I would be worried if I were getting all the questions right because I'd think to myself, where are the questions that I don't understand? If I can do these ones well, that's a waste of my time. I should be looking for the questions that I can't do well. and focusing on those so that I know I fully understand the topic. So really, when you're doing homework, the goal is not to get a bunch of easy questions right. The goal is to get a bunch of hard questions wrong and learn from it. Now, one question that I'm often asked has to do with the amount of time you spend studying. How long should I spend studying? Really, that's something that is up to you. It depends on your situation, depends on your focus. I have ADHD, so for me, it's very difficult for me to keep focused on something if I'm not engaged. And that might mean that I might spend less time studying in a given session than you might, or perhaps more. But here's what's very important. Very often when I ask students about their math homework, what they'll tell me is that they'll be assigned 20 to 40 questions, and it'll take them somewhere between a half hour and an hour to do that homework. Now, that means they're spending a minute, 2 minutes per question. Essentially, that's a bit of a waste of time. I liken this, if I may use an analogy, to going to the gym, getting all dressed up, putting on your gear, and then going to the treadmill, putting it on the lowest possible setting, and going for a leisurely walk for half an hour. Now, kudos to you for going to the gym. I mean, that's good. And you are burning some calories, so that's great. But if you're going to be there, why not increase the difficulty? Why not lift some weights? Why not push yourself? In other words, if you're going to be putting in the work anyway, why not get the maximum possible benefit from it? From that point of view, that time spent at the gym is a bit of a waste of time. You would have burned almost as many calories just lying down on the couch. When you're doing math homework, this sometimes surprises people. In order to really get the maximum benefit from the questions you're doing, each question should take you somewhere around 15 minutes or more to do. If you're spending 1 or 2 minutes on a question, you're really not learning anything from it. Now, of course, you might be thinking to yourself, well, hang on a second. If I spend 15 minutes or 20 minutes on a question, well, if I've got 20 questions to do, that's going to take me 4 or 5 hours to get my homework done. And the answer is, well, you may not get all that homework done. But the time you spend on the 5 or 6 or 10 questions you do get done will be far more useful and far more fruitful than spending an hour or two just whipping out questions by rote that you already know how to do. I mean, if you already know how to do them, why waste your time? So hang on a second. How am I going to spend 15 minutes or 20 minutes doing a single math problem? What am I doing in those 15 or 20 minutes? How do I know when I'm done? Well, most people would think, look, if I did the question and I got the right answer, then I'm done. But that's not the case, because the goal here is not to get the right answer. The goal is to understand a math concept and to know it so perfectly that you always get the right answer. So doing homework properly requires you to kind of have your mind split in two places. Part of your mind is focusing on what you're doing and is focused on the steps and the processes you're doing. But the other part of your mind is focused on what you are thinking. You need to be thinking about your own thoughts. Because if you get a question wrong, what do? Well, for many people, what they'll do is they'll look at the answer and then they'll try and reverse engineer from that answer the process that they would need to get that answer. Now, I'm not going to say that that's entirely a bad thing, but there are some very important problems. The problem is you're doing what you're doing in order to get an answer rather than because it's correct. There's lots of different ways, and I've seen this with many students I've worked with. There's lots of different ways to get a right answer the wrong way. Sure, it'll work in this question. Maybe it'll work in a couple others, but it's not going to work most of the time, right? Math rules are rules that always work. So you have to continually be thinking, what was the thing that I did that led me onto the wrong path? What's the idea that I hold that is leading me wrong? And that's what takes that 10 to 15 minutes, is searching through your thinking and going through a process in order to find where you did something wrong. So one thing I'm going to recommend is, if you have that experience, you work on a question and you get the answer wrong, don't try and get the right answer. Instead, try and identify what led you to the wrong answer, change it, and resolve the question, and see if you get the right answer. Because if you don't, you didn't fix the right thing, or maybe there's other things you also need to fix. Now, how do you know when you're finished studying? The truth is, You're finished when you are 100% confident that if you were given the test at that point, you would be able to answer every question correctly. Okay? Now, that's not likely to happen after one session of studying, because it does take our minds a while to learn concepts and to adopt concepts and adapt them to all the different situations that might arise. So this is why studying is best done over a certain period of time. What I recommend is pay attention again to your level of engagement with what you're doing. We all get tired, and if you find yourself getting tired, take a break or leave it for the next day. The goal is to learn the concept and understand it fully by the time you're writing a test that's going to count for marks or whatever. But that doesn't necessarily have to be after one sitting. Sometimes if you're in the gym, you might struggle with a particular weight 3 or 4 times before you're able to lift it. In the same way, you might struggle with a question 3 or 4 times before you're able to find out or figure out what the idea is that you need to internalize to be able to solve it. And that's normally as a normal part of the learning process. How should I feel when I'm doing math homework? Well, there's really 2 different sets of feelings I want you to be aware of. When you're doing math homework, it's common to feel frustrated, uncertain, but also excited. Those are all good signs. If you're frustrated, frustration means you're learning. But if you're excited, that's also a good thing because it's an encouragement telling you, hey, I'm getting somewhere here. Very often, if we're just doing a bunch of questions that we know by rote, there's little to get excited about because you're really not learning anything. You're not really improving. When you're finished your math homework, you should probably feel exhausted, but you should also feel confident and you should feel a sense of achievement, right? In some way, you've built something. In some way, you're a little better at something than you were before. And that's a good sign that you've made some progress in doing the homework. So here are 4 takeaways I want to give you that you can integrate into the way that you do your math homework. The first is, what I'd like to suggest is that you try the first few questions you've been assigned. If those are really easy for you, skip to the middle. Try a couple there. If those are really easy for you, skip to the end. Try some of the most difficult ones. If those are still really easy for you, forget the whole thing and you find your own questions that are at a difficulty that challenges you. You always want to be working at a level, just as when you're in the gym, you don't want to be lifting a weight that's too easy or too heavy. You want to find something that stresses you, gives you some resistance, but also something that you can work at to become stronger. The second thing is I'd like you to make a habit of every time you're doing homework, pick at least one question that hasn't been assigned that will challenge you. If you do that, you will get quite a bit more out of every time you do homework than you are already getting. Number 3, whenever you finish a problem, summarize the concepts and ideas you use to solve the problem. Don't focus on the steps. Many students want a step-by-step process to solve a problem, but here's the deal. Those steps apply to that problem you just solved and no other ones. Math becomes very difficult if you're trying to remember which steps go with which problems. But if you can summarize your ideas into concepts, you can apply those concepts to every problem. As a final takeaway, there's 2 words I want you to remember. These words are the words supposed to. If anytime you're doing a problem, you're doing something because you're supposed to, that's not math. Math is logic. It's not following someone else's instructions. Whenever you hear yourself saying, I'm doing this because I supposed to, that means you don't know what you're doing. Let me know what your thoughts are on doing math homework. If you do have any questions, please leave those in the comments below. And please check out my other videos on this channel. For those of you who are new to my channel, I ask lots of questions and sometimes I answer them too. Okay.